Hello everyone, I'm your host Amartya Singh, co-founder and CEO of Finflow, a product built by and for modern finance teams. So we are back with the fifth episode of our podcast Inside the CFO Office, an exclusive channel for finance professionals to know more about the journeys of finance leaders and trailblazers in the CFO office. In today's episode, we focus on the need for CFO leadership at small and mid-sized firms. We're super excited to have Darren Farry as a guest to share his journey with us. Darren has 25 years of checkered experience in finance leadership across companies of various shapes and sizes. He currently serves as the CEO of Thoughtful CFO and has been the CFO at ElectricPuppets. He has worked in finance leadership roles at firms like Unitron Global and Descartes Systems Group. Well, on a personal note, I've had some great discussions with Darren on our go-to market for FinFlow's product on his journey. He has shared some great insights for our use cases of credit risk scoring and accounts receivable. And he especially liked the link the product had with the billing and CRM system like Salesforce and how it impacts the sales teams. So I had a great time. So welcome Darren to our podcast. I hope you are
Thanks,
doing
Amartya.
great.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Darren. So let's kickstart the podcast. Right. The first up question from my side is, about your finance leadership journey. You've worked with startups, you've worked with enterprises, you've worked with different shapes and size firms with different shapes and sizes, right? And culminating, of course, in your fractional CFO role. So would love to know about your journey. I mean, how has it been over the last 25 years of experience? I'm sure it must have been really challenging, really interesting. Different people, different challenges, different companies. It must have been really awesome. So would love to
Absolutely,
hear
yeah.
from
I
you.
can't believe it's been 25 years, but yeah, that's about it. Yeah, so I graduated from Wilfrid Laurier University here in Waterloo, where I am, with a Bachelor of Business Administration, and really didn't have plans to go into finance right away. It was in my first job at a school that I was working in a finance department with a finance team. And I had a couple of mentors who were both accountants that basically said to me, if you're going to stay in finance, you probably want to get a designation to enable yourself to be able to rise up the ranks. And so it was at that time that I decided I would go for an accounting designation. In Canada, the at that time there was actually three different accounting designations you could get. It's now one consolidated group, which is great. But at the time, I went for my certified management accountant designation. And I'm glad I did because that was one that was really more focused beyond just finance and accounting. A lot of the course, a lot of the subject matter was to do with marketing and operations and logistics and HR and a more well rounded approach, which has served me well and was of interest to me at that time and has been throughout my career. It's a bit of a theme of my career. Once I got that, or before I got that, actually, before Y2K, I was actually an ERP consultant. So I worked as a software consultant implementing financial systems like FinFlow. And so back then, things were definitely different, which I think we'll touch on a little bit in this session. But things that, at that time, everybody was worried about the world blowing up from a computer standpoint. And so as a consultant, I learned a lot about implementation of systems and that sort of stuff. So that was great and taught me a lot. That's stuff that I use today. But kind of moving more on to my role at Unitron, I spent 20 years with Unitron, which is a division of Sonova, the leading hearing healthcare company in the world. I grew up through the ranks there. One of the lessons I learned at that location or that company was you never know when opportunity is going to knock. And 3 years in as a financial analyst with my CMA designation, I was starting to get antsy and looking outwards to move to my next role when two senior finance people both left the company within 2 weeks. So my door opened. I got an opportunity to fill those roles on an interim basis. I guess I did okay. The CEO tapped me on the shoulder and said, "We'd like you to stay in those roles." And so that started a 10-year journey of being the head finance person for both the Unitron global headquarters, which oversaw R&D and all of the development of the products, and then managing the finances for the wholesale division. So focused here in Canada on the selling of hearing aids. After about 10 years, I moved to sales briefly, and then my journey took me on to be the managing director of Unitron in Canada, overseeing the whole country in terms of the sale of hearing aids, which is where I got a lot of exposure to things outside of finance. So, overseeing marketing, tech support, customer service, operations, which was great. I loved the variety of everything. And so that took me on to, where I am now, which is, I started my own fractional CFO firm, the Thoughtful CFO, And so I am now able to help out companies, small and medium-sized companies, with their business. From a finance perspective, sure, but I've got insight in all sorts of other areas, and I'm able to bring a lot of expertise to them, not just in the finance realm, but in areas beyond that, which I really enjoy, and it's been great for me.
Got it. I think one thing, I mean, which stands out, right, from the perspective of working in an ecosystem like Canada, right? Canada is very supportive to people, teams across different departments. And I've seen a lot of great organizations in Canada. I think as a fractional CFO, right, you have worked across different Canadian startups, right, and Canadian firms, right? So do you focus on Canada or you focus on global firms? Is that kind of an approach that you
Yeah, I mean,
follow?
I'm largely based in Canada and focused on Canadian organizations. I have had a couple clients in the US, really
Right.
wherever they come from. I expect that my scope will
Right.
kind of expand beyond Canada as I move on in my journey with this venture. Wherever I can help companies, I'm open to doing it. I just love the variety of different industries and different spaces to work in.
Right. Got it. And I think one interesting point you mentioned about the entire Y2K happening and your focus, your approach becoming more modern towards post Y2K. So we'll cover that in the technical on the question and which we cover on the finance technologies. But really interesting for I mean the role of your mentors and the role of your mentors in accounting who guided you in a particular direction. Your decision to take a leap of faith into finance, and that has changed the career trajectory, has made you who you are. That's very interesting. And the other point you mentioned about the fractional CFO, right? We'd love to know how do you work with your clients and how do you help them with with their growth and with their all their journeys of bookkeeping, accounting, what all, how do you
Yeah.
help them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm learning a lot too as I go on this, which is great, right? I mean, I spent 20 years at one company and learned so much. It being a leading company, I was privy to a lot of different ways of doing things, systems, a lot of training, courses, education, which now I'm able to leverage with a lot of these small and medium-sized businesses that likely don't have the dollars to fund these types of things, right? And to know how to do these things. You kind of take it for granted a little bit when you're in a global firm of the expertise you get and the systems you have. So to be able to bring that to people is great. I'm finding that a lot of small and medium sized companies have maybe the basics in finance. They see it more as kind of compliance and record keeping and historical, that sort of bookkeeping side of things. Where I think I bring things to the company is the future, what I call future looking finance. Finance is often seen as looking backwards, but the real power to it is how can you predict the future? And the first step that I do when I work with companies is just making sure that everything is stable, it's organized, that I can sort through things. Just oftentimes there's a little bit of chaos in the financial records or systems of companies that need to get sorted out, right? And so that's the first thing. It's like, let's look at the system, let's look at what you've got there, and let's organize it, and let's make a little bit of sense of the chaos before you can move forward. And so I enjoy that. I kind of dive in and give recommendations on how we're going to clean things up. And then it's about, okay, now how do we move things forward? The real, the real power, the real desire of most owners and founders and CEOs that I'm working with is they want to have information that can help them guide the business and make strategic decisions. And so that's really where it's exciting, where once you've got things stabilized and you've benchmarked things, you have metrics in place now track things, that's when you can start to see the improvement of those things and making decisions and saying, okay, your cash flow, we're now projecting cash flow forward 6 to 12 months. This is what it's going to look like in 6 to 12 months. These are things that a lot of companies and owners and CEOs just don't have visibility to in a lot of small and medium-sized firms. So they're really happy to get to get that expertise and to be able to set that up so that they can kind of see how things are moving forward. I'm a big believer in budgeting and planning. A lot of people maybe see that as a bit of a constraint or restriction, but it's really not. I mean, if you put together a good plan and good budget, it gives you the power to be able to go and spend those things, right? It justifies it. It looks forward to say, okay, if we're generating this level of sales, then we're okay to go and invest in these activities, these initiatives. So it really actually is empowering to be budgeting and planning because you're always on schedule, you're always on track of things. You're not staying awake at night wondering what the future holds because you've planned for it and you know that, if we're hitting these sales targets, then we're okay to spend this money. Cash flow looks good. This is the kind of reassurance that I like to give to owners and founders. that they don't typically have in small and medium sized businesses, that moving forward they can feel like they're in control, things are organized. And then on a monthly basis, to be able to sit down and have a financial review with them to say, here's what the last month looked like, here's how things are tracking this fiscal year, and now here's what the future looks like. We're making some changes to our P&L forecast or our cash flow forecast based off of what's happened, and you're giving visibility to the owner as to what things look like in the next 6 to 12 months.
I mean, two, three important pointers that you spoke about. One is, of course, the learning aspect of it, right? You mentioned about your experience with learning, right? I mean, a parallel question to that. I mean, what is being you? What do you? How important is the need for constant learning, especially for finance team, finance folks, because there are so many things happening, right? The world is changing on really great pace, and I mean, sometimes, and it's also connected with your point about chaos, right? Like you look at a yearly kind of a thing, you have you have accounting requirements, your monthly billing requirements, monthly payable requirements, salaries, and you need to have the taxation requirement. There's so many things which takes up a lot of your time. So there is chaos, there is standard requirement. It's very difficult to think
Yeah,
strategically, right? So it's a two-parter. First is the learning. How do you believe that people can learn and keep learning, and how important is that in general for finance assistant or a finance executive, admins, head of finance, CFO? How important is the learning aspect of it? And the second is in terms of chaos and in terms of the regular requirements that are on a monthly, quarterly, and a yearly requirement. How can somebody find the bandwidth to focus on strategic finance or building on a what to do for the future, right? So these are the two questions
yeah,
from my
yeah.
side.
It's funny because your second part of your question was kind of how I was going to answer the first part of the question.
Okay.
That's the thing. People are so busy, right? And so the first thing I think that goes out the window is people learning. They are so focused on getting the job done and doing the things they need to do on a daily basis that they really don't. I think they see learning as like an extra thing they may get to do. And it starts at the top.
Right.
I think you need a CEO, you need a leader that's willing to say, okay, we need people to be learning on a consistent basis, and we need to allow them to have time to do that. It's not just about getting each person to just, well, fit it in when you can. That's not really enabling them and empowering them to do it. And the payoff is substantial. I had some time to kind of prepare when I was launching my venture, the Thoughtful CFO. And I got to tell you, that time period to learn a lot of things that I wanted to do and dive into things, it was awesome. I loved it. It was so exciting. Something I didn't really get to do in a big way when I was working because you're just so busy. So I think it's critical that there's time carved out for people to invest in learning in various things that they can do. Because you're right, technology has moved forward and new systems and new ideas, new concepts that people need an opportunity to absorb and then think about, how do I put this into my role, into the company to improve things. People tend to just kind of go with the status quo. Well, this is the way we've done it and it works and we're moving forward. But then you're stuck in that. You never really get to build in some efficiency or improve things because you're not learning. So I think that's a key thing, is leaders need to enable it. They need to carve out the time for people to go and do that, with the goal of it improving the systems, the processes, and the output of the organization, the people in it. So as an individual, what do you do? Well, I mean, you got to make it a priority, right? In terms of bandwidth, you've got to set aside some time for, I'm going to invest, every Friday afternoon, I'm going to put all the tasks and things I've got to do to the side. And here's the three things I want to dive into. We have access to so much information
Right.
nowadays. It's videos and YouTube and all that sort of stuff. You can learn a lot just by taking an afternoon and spending a couple hours just watching some videos and delving into topics that you could then integrate in your business. Um, that's my thoughts on
Right.
on that.
Got it. I think we spoke about the future of finance, right? And we also talked about your role, that how you have helped, you've worked with startup founders and, you know, given them direction to their thoughts that, it's important to, focus on your current operations in terms of doing everything that is required from the finance operation side of it. And more importantly, think on future of where the company is going. And that's where a budgeting helps, forecasting helps, and, and how the company is going to shape up, as in the future. I would like to talk about Thoughtful CFO, right? The Thoughtful CFO, What was the vision behind? You talked about it that you wanted to help out firms, you wanted to help us startup founders, you wanted to use your knowledge, your passion for the problem statements, and you wanted to apply it to them. What has been your vision for the Thoughtful CFO, and how has it panned
Yeah,
out for
yeah.
you?
Well, I think it starts with the name, and I've got to give credit to my wife who came up with the name after a lot of us bantering back and forth and, going with, buzzwords of business and things like that. She threw that one out there and it kind of stuck. It wasn't an immediate, okay. But the reason why I went with it is twofold. One, I think that it's a double entendre. Thoughtful being innovative ideas, brainstorming, that aspect to it, and then thoughtful, which is maybe the more prominent connotation is caring, empathetic, things like that. What I obviously bounced the idea off some people, like the name off some people, and nobody came back and said, "Oh, that's not a good descriptor of you." A lot of people did say, that fits well with you, and I appreciated that. I mean, absolutely. So the vision is to marry those two things. All of the experience, all of the learnings, all of the concepts, systems, models that I've learned and utilize is that innovative side that I can bring to small and medium sized clients to help them with their business. On the flip side, the empathetic and the caring side, I'm a big believer in culture. I'm a big believer that people are working, 8, 10 hours a day. They got to enjoy what they're doing. They got to be a part of a team. They've got to be getting more than just a paycheck out of it. And so that aspect of caring and empathy was important for me in the vision of my company. That when I'm working with clients, I want to marry those two. I want to support them. I want to help them learn. I want to educate them. And so there's that caring side because I really think if you've got that in your workplace where you've kind of got support and a good culture or whatever, it's a great place to be. A lot of people sometimes say I don't love my job, but I love the people I work with. That's a good culture. That's what you're striving for. Ideally, you have both, right? You love your job and you love the culture. So that was the vision of it, and I wanted to take the things that I learned as a part of a global company and bring it to small and medium-sized businesses, like I said before, who may not have access to all the education and learning and training that I've had. And so that I can look at their business and say, here's some concepts that I think would fit in well with your business to improve things, to improve the financial outlook and just the way that you operate. So that's kind of the vision of the company.
Got it. Thanks. I mean, it's a wonderful vision, and thoughtful really makes a lot of sense because one thing you mentioned is there's such a lot of chaos currently in the entire world, especially in the finance ecosystem, every ecosystem, especially, right? So in those cases, thoughtful really makes sense because empathy is really required, right? I mean, I'm talking like a founder, right? I have gone from one
Yeah.
stage to another, right? And when I lead work with operators, for example, and I'm talking about operators in any space, it can be somebody in finance or somebody in marketing or somebody in sales. When I work with people who are mentors or advisors or general counsel, one thing that is required is empathy, right? Because what I believe is that, I mean, the world sees the things in their own way, but empathy goes a far way because it gives you the comfort that somebody understands you and their vision and what they want, their objectives are kind of aligned with you. So that gives a lot of comfort. So thoughtful really makes a lot of sense, especially the empathy piece. Being empathetic with your startup founders really help. The other is obviously thoughtful in terms of the innovations that you do, the kind of thoughts that you put in, the learning that goes into it. Really great thoughts, and really thanks for sharing the vision of the Thoughtful CFO. And I'm sure that it's something that has helped startup founders and will keep helping startup founders and mid-sized firms. And I'm sure that it has a great track record in the future, right? I mean, obviously, you have worked in big firms, you have worked with startups, you have worked in different shapes and sizes, firms of different shapes and sizes. I would love to know about the two most interesting and difficult challenges that you have worked on, be it people, technology, processes, anything. What are the two biggest challenges
Yeah,
that you
I
faced?
think the challenges, I guess, with my current venture, is overcoming the kind of perception of finance, right? Is what people kind of see finance as, like I said before, kind of backwards looking, record keeping, score keeping, compliance, tax, and those are all part of finance and important parts of finance. What I'm pushing on and trying to get people to see more and more is the future looking finance, right? Is the role that finance can play in running the company and strategy in helping the company out either generate higher revenues, save costs, just run the company better. And oftentimes that's hard to get people to see because they just have this perspective of finance kind of being penny pinching and constraining, and I want to flip that on its head. I want them to see it as enabling and empowering. And if you plan well and you think about these things and you strategize well, it does enable you to do more, right? It makes that it puts everything on a page and says, okay, well, where are we going to prioritize things? We've got so much money, limited
Right.
usually. So where do we want to put our bets? Where do we want to, invest our money? And then once you make that decision, it's like, okay, let's go full bore ahead. We've decided this is the best place to move forward. And so then you start making better strategic decisions, better financial decisions. So that's been one of the challenges that I've faced with this, with this venture is flipping that perspective of finance as limiting and maybe backwards looking to empowering and future focused. The other thing for, I guess, for me with my venture is, a thing I've struggled with, and maybe a lot of people struggle with this in their role is the focus on various things, right? I come to I come to clients with a lot of experience in a lot of different areas beyond finance. And so it's difficult. I get excited by all the challenges they've got and how I can help them out beyond finance. And so there's a challenge there for me to remain focused on, the financial things that they're coming to see me for. I want to help out in all areas that I can. And so I sat down with
Right.
a colleague in January, to talk about my new venture and how things were going, and the whole fractional world. And it was funny because he has some experience with some fractional CFOs, and he said that the knock against them at times is that they're very high level advisory and not as much helpful and more hands on stuff. And I laughed a little bit because I said, I think I have the opposite problem. I think I want to get, I'm too excited to get in and help out and hands on and things like that, to the point that you can spread yourself a little too thin. There's only so much you can do. So that's something that I'm working
Right.
on in terms of the balance, right? Is being able to bring that strategy and advisory level mentality to clients, but also enable them and help them and get a little hands on to show them how it's done and to teach them and educate them. So those are some of the challenges that I've got with this venture. And with regards to
Mm.
businesses in general and the challenges they face, I think it's just the word chaos keeps getting brought up. Or I brought it up, you brought it up. It's just so busy, right? There's just so much going on. So it's being able to cut out the noise and focus on the things that you want to prioritize. And everybody says that they want to
Right.
prioritize, but really then it's like, well, this creeps in and this creeps in, this creeps in. And I've often heard
Right.
the phrase that strategy, is about what you say no to as much as what you decide to do. And it's a lot more about gatekeeping. It's like, this is our strategy, this is our focus. Everything else just got to stay out. It's a hard thing to do,
Right.
but that's a challenge that I
Right.
think everybody faces, just being able to focus and prioritize on what's most important.
Right. I mean, the problem statements you talked about prioritization in your current role, right? I mean, that is the kind of importantly understanding what is important, whether fundraise is important, or the growth metrics are important, or cash flows are important. There are multiple such aspects in terms of running the company. And on the other hand, there are certain, well, future visions is important, like one aspect you mentioned, right? I mean, you are having, let's say, a limited revenue, right, and you want to grow at a particular scale. And when a customer, and I'm talking about a problem statement that we are facing, right, a customer comes and says, hey, build
Yeah,
this, and I'm in, right? And it might not align with your future vision of the product, right? And you want that money to come in, but you are saying, hey, it's not a part of the future vision. There is 60 to 70% we have, 30 to 40% we do not have, and which is not going to be something that we can replicate at other firms. Then what do, right? So then we take a certain level of percentage check, like 80, 90%, and 10% additional. We just build that additional product and go ahead and just get the money. If we know that this product might not, this feature might not be used, but at least 80 to 90% is there. So those kind of prioritization calls that we have to do. And because it also means that if you are prioritizing a specific customer, at that point of time it's revenue, but for 1 year or 2 year or 3 year or 4 year down the line, it's customer servicing. You are servicing a customer which might not fit into your overall vision and roadmap. So that's why these prioritization, I completely agree. I mean, it's very, very important because there are so many things happening, so many chaos points. A lot of things are happening, and prioritization is really important. The first point which you mentioned about the future of finance, and that's very interesting, right? Because I am a big believer in future of finance, right? If you see, And I'm talking about a finance technical
Hmm.
ecosystem, right? If you look at the entire finance tech systems, I mean, we talked about Y2K, and I'm sure I would love to dip into your experience with the ERP system then and right now. But if you see the overall ERPs like a SAP S4HANA or a Oracle, NetSuite or Fusion or Microsoft Dynamics or Zeros of the world, I mean, there is a certain level of product dev that has been happening, but they're mostly focused on the bookkeeping and accounting and every other aspects. They have multiple other products solving for it. But I mean, there's another angle. Obviously, AI/ML come in with a picture, and they are building some tools of generative AI and predictive AI. But what is important is to look at the future of finance, and that's what we at Finflow wanted to focus on: building a modern
Hmm.
composable ERP, which complements the current ERPs and has a more use case driven approach. Like you solve for accounts receivable, payable, treasury, record to report, and very beautifully and interestingly, all of these problem statements are linked. You are onboarding the right set of customers, doing the right credit risk scoring and decisions, your receivables get sorted, you have a proper hand control in your treasury and forecasting, right? And your record to report is sorted because you have all the data systems on records. It is linked with your payables because it's linked with your ERP. So that is the kind of approach that we have seen with building a product which is aligned with building the future of finance, right? And that's, I think, very important, and that in my opinion makes a finance person much more powerful in their approach, because they understand that something is short termish, something is long termish. That future of finance is the long term vision that you are going forward, right? Yeah, I mean, I would love to know your thoughts on how the finance tech ecosystem has panned out. You've worked in, before Y2K, you've worked with ERPs, you have been working with ERPs. I'm sure when you're working with a startup and mid-sized firms, they're mostly on QuickBooks, and you have worked on NetSuite, S4, SAP, S4 HANA. How has been your experience in like a finance tech ecosystem, especially in
Yeah, so
ERPs?
going back to Y2K, I mean, back then it was, everybody bought a big system and then it had to be implemented and customized, and that we were just back then everybody was just trying to figure out, how to use these things and how to get your arms around these things. And then you had vendors that were like, well, this is, we're on a project for a year and it's our cash cow for the year sort of thing, and it's big money and all that sort of stuff. And customizations just led to continuous customizations and things breaking and stuff. So it was probably the journey that needed to happen with technology to go through to figure it out. Fast forward to today, and I think things are a lot more out of the box and a lot more thought through and integrated, and that's good. You don't want to be customizing too much. Everybody wants the perfect system for their business, but then it just there's constant patches and things that have to keep going in perpetuity, and it just causes a lot of issues. I like the way things are so much more integrated today. It's really cool to see, the integration between systems and how things can flow through, and how information over here gets to there. And it just simplifies things and keeps things more aligned. I definitely think it makes people's jobs easier. And so that's the goal, right? Is how do you make things more efficient? How do you get people, working on things that maybe only humans can do, and not have to focus on the cleanliness of data and all that sort of stuff. I'm really impressed with
Right.
like the QuickBooks and those types of programs and what they can do nowadays. Working with small businesses that have QuickBooks and those types of systems, the information you can get out of there and the way that you can do things for such a small business is super impressive. I think there's a limitation on how small businesses maybe use them. And that's where I think I can help, kind of coming in and going, okay, you've got all this data and you have financial statements on a monthly basis, but are you really reviewing them? Are you utilizing it in the way that you should be able to do? And that's my goal when I come in to work with a company, right? Is like, let's get the data out of there. Let's look at the financial statements. Let's make sure you understand what's happened. What's the story of the month? What happened last month in all aspects? And then let's look at, okay, we've got all this historical data that which should educate us for the future. Let's project the future. And not having to spend so much time on the compilation of data, but much more on the analysis and interpretation is the right spot to be. And that's what I like to do and what I like to bring to owners and CEOs and founders of startups and things like that is, let's use the information and then let's plan for the next initiatives you're doing, the next step, how to scale up and all that sort of stuff. So technology and kind of where it is in finance right now is a great spot that's enabling a lot better discussions and planning for the future and how companies can make better decisions to kind of grow their firms.
Got it. And I mean, what is your take on AI, artificial intelligence, and its impact? Have you seen it touching your own line of business and in terms of the startups that they work upon? And what has been from your peers? What has been your inference, and what
Yeah,
is
I
your
mean,
take?
it's about the definition of AI, right? Like, I mean, I think things in Excel are already doing things. They're predicting kind of what you want to do and formulas and all that sort of stuff. So it creeps in whether you even kind of realize it or not. You just probably think, oh, that's a handy little feature that it's got there. But it really is AI at work. I think it's been super helpful in taking tasks that were maybe more mundane and manual and absolutely doing it in a much more effective and efficient way. Its ability to kind of analyze data to look out. Fraud prevention is one area where it's super helpful to identify where there's some breaks in the pattern or some weird things going on, so it can kind of throw up a red flag and say, hey, someone might want to look into this and ask some questions. So super helpful for that. I think there's so much happening in it now, and it's relatively new. And I go back to my point about having time to learn and to integrate these things. I don't think that's happened a whole lot, right? It's like there's so much going on, but people haven't had the ability to step back, look at the various tools they could be implementing and saying, okay, I could use that to free up 6 hours a month of my time. If I can get that implemented, it'll save me some time and then I can focus on other things. That's the humans are probably limiting the implementation of that because they don't have the time to analyze the vast opportunities for it and implement it and ultimately save the time. People tend to just kind of like, I'm too busy working to improve the efficiency with which I work, right? And I think that's where AI is maybe going to take a little bit more time to implement, is people seeing what the possibilities are and then actually taking the steps and the time to implement it to save themselves time in the future.
Got it. Got it. One aspect on, I mean, we talked about your experience and your journeys, right? I mean, across mid-sized firms and as well as becoming your own, the CFO of a great company and then becoming your own CEO and leading Thoughtful CFO, right? So you have seen, and you also mentioned it between the discussions that, finance is not the only place that you've worked in. You've worked on multiple aspects, and that's where you want to contribute to firms, right? I mean, there are multiple aspects where you can help out firms, right? From that perspective, what would be your piece of advice for finance professionals as to how they should look at growing their career to where you are from maybe a finance executive role to to the leadership role? What should they do? One aspect, I believe you will talk about learning. That's a great point, and learning is one point which I would also like you to maybe chart out 2 3 pointers of how they can go about learning, because learning is also as immense. There are so many
Yeah.
things that you can learn now, and what else can they do to become a finance leader like you?
Yeah. So when I set out on this journey and kind of decided this is what I wanted to do, the first thing was I actually watched a couple of videos online of, I might get it wrong, I believe it's the CFO report. It's a gentleman out of Texas who runs his own fractional CFO business. Super helpful
I see.
to watch that, because he talked about, you oftentimes go into these things thinking, I need to know all the things in the world of finance to be able to be useful to companies. And he kind of quickly dispelled that and said, here are four key areas that I've been working with companies for 7 8 years in this capacity, and these are the four areas they need help on. And when I heard that, I was like, I can help out in all those
Right.
areas and many more, but specifically those four. So anybody kind of thinking about the fractional world, like may be concerned about, I need to know everything about everything. That's not the case. You've got expertise that you can bring in various areas that will be helpful to different people. So that's kind of the first thing that I would advise. The other thing is, what I'm trying to do with my venture and kind of part of my vision is, I want finance and the financial terminology and concepts to be accessible to people. So it is not my endeavor to go and work for a company and be there forever. I want to go in, I want to assess the situation, I want to figure out where the opportunities are for improvement, make those improvements, and teach the people there how they're going to work moving forward from a financial perspective. I want to impart knowledge. I want them to feel reassured and comforted when I leave. Okay, we've got this now. We've got good systems in place. We know how to use them, and we're on top of things. So that finance isn't an area that they're like afraid of. Concern is not in check. Oftentimes people just turn a blind eye to it and don't just, oh, well, hopefully it works out. That's not a great strategy. So I want to leave them in a way that they're educated and feel confident in what we've put in place, and then they can use it going forward. And the key thing there is about simplified, right? I think maybe it's not just constrained to the finance world, but finance people, with all the terminology and buzzwords that we have in finance, you feel good about yourself, you understand these things, but there's a lot of people that don't and are intimidated by it, right? So you want to bring that to a level that you can explain things to people, they can understand the basics, the fundamentals, so that they can move forward knowing enough that they can feel confident in running their own business. When you start at a
Got it.
business, like anybody who starts at a business is probably an expert in that business and probably not a lot in finance. But if you look at one common thread amongst all businesses, they use finance. They're going to need to be conversant in finance, right? So it's exciting for people like us that are very knowledgeable and expertise in finance, because we can be utilized in so many different places. But there's a responsibility to try to go into those companies, help them, help finance and the financial terms and methodologies and things become accessible to them, and bring them to a level that they can feel
Right.
confident, that they have a good handle on their finances.
Great. Got it. Thanks, Darren, for sharing your thoughts. Any closing remarks that you have? I mean, how does the future of Thoughtful CFO work out? Any closing remarks
Yeah,
from
I
your
mean,
side?
being a relatively new firm myself, right, the opportunities for growth and expansion are ever present, and things that I didn't think about initially, I was like, oh, that's an avenue to go, that's an avenue to go. So I'm contemplating those things now. I'm still in that learning phase, right? With more clients coming on board and learning what their specific needs are and where they need the most help. That's kind of what I'm doing at this point. So I think in the next couple of years,
Right.
I'll kind of compile that, take a step back myself, strategize on where can I be most helpful to companies. Will I expand
Right.
the company to bring on new people, new resources, which is something I'm definitely considering from a bookkeeping side of things, and just from additional fractional CFOs possibly. It's that sort of stuff, and where can I take this? So that's where I'm at now. In a couple of years, I would expect that I've got a much more concrete plan of the areas where I think I can be most helpful to small and medium sized businesses, and focusing on them and helping them out. And we'll see where it goes from there, and take it to the highest level.
Got it. Thanks, Darren, for sharing your thoughts. And it was great speaking with you. I think, I mean, the biggest takeaway from my side over the discussion is your empathy for the customers and for firms that need your help. And that's really important. That's really glad. I'm really glad to know your vision and your desire to help out firms, because firms need it. I, as a startup founder, I generally need a lot of help, and I'm sure that people need a lot of help. So it's really great for you to actually empathize and understand the requirements and look beyond only helping them from finance and looking at multiple aspects and guiding them from your experience. So really great. And as I said, I've always had a great time speaking with you, knowing your thoughts, the way, the measured approach of you sharing your feedback and thoughts has been really great for me and for our company. So really, thanks for being a part of the podcast. So, gentlemen, guys, we are drawing to the end of our podcast with Darren. Thanks for joining in for our fifth episode, and please wait for the next. And
Thanks
thanks
so much.
everyone. Bye bye.
Great being here.